onto you guys. So here I've drawn a very rudimentary skeleton. Now, when I talk about anchor points, that's basically where the muscles attach to the bones. Now, those are different than pulling points because even though both anchor points and pulling points are attached to the skeletal structure to make it move and all that sort of jazz, anchor points are stationary. They don't move. Pulling points are what the muscles pull towards. Now, over the skeleton, I've drawn a rudimentary muscular system. Let's see. Who can tell me what the anchor point for this muscle group would be right here? Need to make that darker rather. For the pectoral muscle.
The collarbone?
The collarbone and the sternum. And the pulling point is where you could probably guess right here on the side of the humerus. Who can tell me where the anchor point and pulling point for these muscles are? Now it's a little bit tricky, so if you don't be afraid to say the answer. Which one is it? The anchor point or the pulling point? That's correct. Now where do you think the pulling point with these would be? You would think that, but no, the ribs are like Oh, Taylor got it right. The inside of the shoulder blade and the ribs. These muscles on the side of the ribs are what helps your scapulae to actually get pulled forward, so that when you if you do it like right now, like you shove your shoulders forward and you slump down and everything, that's the muscles on the side of your ribs pulling your scapula forward so you can actually do that. Conversely, the dorsi are basically what helps to pull your body backward, sort of like if you flex your back like backwards, you push your shoulder blades together. Though that's your latimus dorsi, basically scrunching your body backwards. And here are the anchor points for the rest of the body labeled in green. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Just so you can kind of get a vague estimate for kind of just honestly how clunky the human body is. And here are the pulling points. Now you'll probably are able to notice that, at least rudimentarily so, that there are a lot more pulling points than there are anchor points. The human body is constantly in motion. It is always in motion. Those sort of static muscle diagrams, they're accurate for the most part, but when you're in motion, when you're moving, when you're grabbing something, when you're even breathing, turning your head to look at something, you are always in motion. Now, someone give me a part of the body that they struggle with musculature wise. We can go through this step by step and break it down and see how we can sort of improve upon it.
Shoulders.
The upper leg outside area. Ah, I know what you're talking about. We can start on shoulders, because shoulders are, they're not weird, but it's a curious choice that you picked. Let's see. Basically, for shoulders, what I'm going to be focusing more on essentially what makes up that part. Now, my sketches are not going to be wholly medically accurate, but I mean, this isn't a medical lesson, so I don't feel that bad. The shoulder muscles, you're talking about primarily this one, yeah? The one that just like everyone typically thinks of when they think of shoulders, or a combination of that, like the muscle that comes around over here.
Yeah, like the combination of that.
All right, so we're going to pretend that the human body is made up of nothing but this. We're going to all just take a hot second and pretend that everyone's just a bunch of skeletons made out of nothing but shoulder muscles. Now with this, the shoulder is basically, it's pretty big already, even when it's not bunched up. But when it is bunched up, and I'm just going to copy paste this. It's basically, a disclaimer is that to understand muscles in motion, you kind of have to have a rudimentary knowledge of the skeleton. But that's not something that I'm going to be able to really teach you in around roughly an hour. So I'm going to guide you through this just sort of with the assumption that there's a vague understanding of the skeleton, though as an aside, most of the time like the tips for a skeleton is that skeletons are a lot smaller than you would think they are. It's a little bit fucked up, actually. Mostly just because you have to consider the fact that if the skeleton was as big as you think it is, humans would be a lot chunkier because there's all of those layers of muscles that have to sort of weave out around one another. Because right now I'm only going to be focusing on the superficial muscles, like the deep internal muscles. Those don't exist. Unless you're like a gore artist or something like that, you are never going to have to necessarily worry about that. Also, unless you world build and like monster design, if you want to get deep in the sauce, those muscles will likely never really be relevant to you. I see you two. I respect you too. Now, with that sort of disclaimer of you have to have a rudimentary knowledge of the skeleton, you're also going to have to remember that with that, to raise the arm, pretty much everything in that sort of side of your body lifts. So the collarbones are not stationary. This is not how an arm moves. You have something wrong with your collarbone. It's fused to your ribs if it's just like that. Instead, how the skeleton moves underneath the muscles is that the clavicle will move with this. And that's basically a combination of, hold on a second. It's a combination of the muscles that are just attached to the clavicle, sort of like pulling it upwards. Mostly the use of the shoulder and a lot of the muscles attached to your back, such as mostly the trapezius. I'm assuming it's been a while, and honestly, you don't really need to know precisely the names of the muscles. All you have to really know is their function. It's nice to know the names for looking back on references and everything, but you don't need to know the muscles. You can just say like the neck muscles sort of in the back, like just it's good to know, but it's not required. Now, the muscle for the shoulder, because there's actually, it's going to look a little bit weird. It's not going to look the way you kind of necessarily expect it to look. Because with the arm, we also have to factor in the arm muscle. The arm muscles are also basically bunched up and just sort of vibing around in this area, which also forms the armpit and everything. It sort of just stretches out. Like, just this is what I mean when I say that the musculature system is fucky. There's a lot of shit going on. It's really hard to like learn. So it's ultimately this is a crash course. This is sort of a get your foot in the door thing. And now with the sort of rudimentary system that we've had, here is where the shoulder muscle would pretty much look like. It's much smaller looking when the arm is just down. However, that's mostly just because it's bunched up and it has that tension from basically lifting the entirety of the arm. Because it's just a little bit of a muscle. Like, I mean, we're all artists here, so like if you just like raise your arm above, you can like feel that strain sort of in your shoulder if you just keep it upwards for a long time. It's just all that tension keeping up like a single appendage upwards. It's tough. It's a lot of strain. And if you like, I'm holding up my arm right now and I'm starting to feel that burn. You're probably going to be able to feel it too if you're doing what I'm doing. You can put your hands down now. This is basically also just sort of an extension of the animation tip of squash and stretch. Because basically, with the shoulder muscle, you have this little sort of dough shape that gets much more circular as it bunches up, if that makes sense. With that in mind, we're also going to have to kind of consider the entire body in motion. But before that, we can try to kind of go over another part of the body. Now, two people suggested hips and the outer part of the leg. Was that? Let me stretch this out. Upper leg and hips. Hmm. You know, we can probably tackle that at the same time because they are in a generally they're in the approximate same location. Yeah, no, here's the thing. Muscles near the pelvis are fuck. And I'm going to try to help guide you through that. Cuz the pelvic girdle is basically just this weird looking thing that you know it. You know it but you don't know it. Even right now, the sort of vague approximation that I'm drawing right now is not accurate by any stretch of the imagination. Like, this is a bone that even I really have to take a step back and reference most of the time, but I'm just kind of going for it right now. Yeah, no, Taylor, I know that you also have like a pretty strong rudimentary knowledge of muscles. So, yeah, no, Taylor knows that hip bones are also a fuck. Quote me on this. The human body is a fuck. Now, something with the humerus bone, as we're going to be focusing on the leg too, is that you would think that this is how it looks, right? That's not quite the case. Humerus bones are more sort of like soft sort of ball at the end with a kind of knob on the other sort of side. This is so this can slot in. Yeah, ball and socket joint, but not exactly, because a true ball and socket joint is the scapula and the arm. That is a true sort of ball and socket joint. Now the leg is the humerus and the hip bone are sort of that kind of thing. However, you cannot get the same range of motion with your leg that you can get with your arm. It's very close, but just because of the nature of how your legs and your arms are sort of adjusted, like there's a lot of ways that you can basically shift your arm around, and with the leg, you can't really get that. Well, I didn't know that you could hear my music. That's fine. But yeah, let's just insert that real quick. Most of the time, the misinterpretation of how the humerus looks is pretty much just you know what, that's fair. Should probably get rid of my calculators and stuff then. Yeah, most of the misinterpretation for how the humerus looks is mostly just because you can't see the other side of the knob inlaid into the bone. Also, fun fact, the humerus is in fact the strongest bone in the body. If you break it, God help you. Now I'm mostly just approximating my knowledge of how long this is. It's going to be a very short leg. Short people do exist. This is not short erasure, I promise you. Gotta work it vertically. Now let's see. Outer muscle and hips. Oh, yeah, no. You see, here's that. That's why I said that it's not important to know the names of the bones, because this is technically the femur. The humerus is in the arm. That is my bad. I'm just kind of trying to go at a rapid pace so that I can try to get everything that I want to get out. But yeah, no. Humerus is your bicep bone. Femur is your thigh bone. Femur is the strongest. Thigh leg bone, strong. Everything else, kind of strong, not as strong. Now let's see. Now the real fucky thing with this bone is that there are so many muscles, as Taylor before had stated, that just connect to this damn thing. It's kind of redonkulous. Now let's see. I'm trying to sort of refresh myself as I'm going along with it, just because it's weird. Also, I actually realized, disregard this, this is not an accurate depiction. Because this is where the ass muscles attach. There's actually a different socket in the hip bone that the femur attaches to, and it's upwards here. And it juts out a lot further than you'd think, but that's also mostly because it's an anchor point for the muscles. I'll just draw it on the other side too, like this. Now, like, this is also pretty much my disclaimer for saying reference is really important, Because you might think that you know something, like how I thought I knew how that looked like. I did it. I had to look it up. And with the humerus, it basically sort of twists further in. Because the way that the leg is shaped, this is basically kind of the rudimentary way that it looks. Let's see. Hip muscles and leg muscles are a little bit sort of weird when it comes to them sort of being in motion and activated and all that sort of thing. Mostly just because you're not going to see them in movement a whole ton. They are stretched thin in the body so that they're not necessarily going to be seeing a whole ton of precise movement. The femur bone is the reason why there is a bit of a bump near the hip, yeah. Because when it comes to the femur bump, it's a lot closer to the surface of your leg than you might think. Human body is also a fuck, and it's also full of mysteries. Let's see, because this is also a bit of a tricky one. Hmm. Ah. Basically, with the hips, a rudimentary way to kind of glance upon this, and oh my, this is a lot weirder. Yeah, no, it's just a much weirder body than you would think. Because I also have to draw a little bit of the spine out. So basically, hip muscles, they would be attached to this ledge right here. And basically, this would be the pulling point for the leg. You want to lift your leg? That muscle right there basically just contracts up and bunches. Sort of. It is kind of distinct from the obliques, which is a bit more different. And with this part right here, that basically attaches down to these little anchor points right here. This area is a bit more weird because this is kind of three muscles, while these two, they're the most prominent, but sometimes you will catch peeps of the third muscle basically extending out here. Now I realize these diagrams are getting a little bit muddled, so bear with me. With the outside of the muscle, the thigh, this part of the body doesn't really sort of shift in with all that like this part of the body, like right here, it's mostly when, actually no, that's a lie. It does squash up when you're pulling your leg upwards, sort of in that style. Every leg in the thigh, pretty much, when you lift it up. Every leg. Every leg is sort of designed to kind of, with the muscles in the thigh in mind, just pull it up to run. Just because Your thighs are pretty much the strongest part of your body. And just because we are in there, there's kind of a little bit of a divot when it comes to muscle in your thigh, because this is pretty much where, right here, where everything kind of connects to bone. Everything is sort of an anchor point in that area. This also comes true for the butt muscle. Everything kind of just looks like a tire in that area if you really sort of get like nitty and gritty down with it. How in depth with anatomy do you believe is necessary to draw the human body? I would say, yeah, the gluteus maximus, which is quite bumpy, but that's fine. I would say that the amount of in-depth detail that you need to know about the human anatomy is, you need to know enough about it to know what it looks like when you are doing mundane things. You kind of need to know, I would say, how an arm looks when it's raised up above the head. You need to know what a hand looks like in various positions. I would say that as long, like, because here's the thing, you don't need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of it, you don't need to have everything memorized. That's where I go to emphasize reference. The more you reference muscles, the more you look at things, the more you can realize just by natural happenstance what they will look like, just because you've seen it so many times and it's going to get reflexive. And even when you're stumped, still look at reference. Like for this the diagram about the hip bones and the thigh muscles, I actually did like look up diagrams and everything just so I could sort of show it in a more digestible light, because medical diagrams are good and dandy, yeah, but a lot of it is obtuse. A lot of it is to understand what the body looks like in depth. But to know the body in depth, you don't necessarily need to know. It's nice to know, but you don't need to know every rudimentary part. We're going to cover that sort of around the end. It's, so when it comes to knowing, it's, you just need to have a basic knowledge is all. You need to know what the most recognizable muscles do. Like most people aren't going to be drawing characters that are heavily athletic, heavily cut, and for that you can kind of get away with it. But you can't get away with it for long if you want something to truly be believable. Even people who draw very cartoonishly, very sort of exaggeratedly, people in animation and art industries, most of the time, even when they're exaggerating something, they'll have that rudimentary knowledge of the musculature system to make something look subtly believable. And that's that little bit that matters. Superheroes are a challenge because, yeah, no, it's that they are they are cut like fucking diamonds. And most of the time, they're going to be doing poses that most normal ass human beings will only be really found in after they've been hit by cars. Precisely. Yeah, superheroes is all about exaggeration. But if you exaggerate without knowing the base fundamentals of what you're trying to exaggerate, it's very obvious. Even people who don't have that rudimentary knowledge are going to be able to tell what's wrong. That's why, I mean, to fucking beat a dead horse with a broken stick, that's why Liefeld's work is so what it is, what it was known for back in sort of like the older times of comics. Just because like he probably knew the fundamentals, it's just that he was drawing fast at ludicrous speeds. That's why everything looked like that, because there was just the time back then was just churn out as much stuff as you can because that's how you make your paycheck. He disregarded the fundamentals for speed and now he's a meme. Especially the post Michelangelo artists, yeah. Let's see. But yeah, with legs, it's more just. I'm going to sort of break it down a little bit more stylistically so it's even more digestible to understand. So here we have a leg. This little bit that I usually draw is always sort of a muscle that attaches here, but I'm not going to go that in depth. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's the thing. Michelangelo drew and sculpted women as men, but with orange-shaped breasts, because Michelangelo was gay as fuck. Moving on. Now, to lift this leg, we're just going to apply the same sort of thing of squash and stretch. With the leg kind of going up. You know what, let's get this man a fat ass, he deserves it. That butt is going to flatten out when the leg raises up because it's the muscle getting pulled out so that the muscles in this area right here can bunch up and lift the leg. So ultimately, this hip segment right here will look a bit smaller as the muscles in the thigh right here will sort of bulge a bit more because they are basically pulling the entire leg upwards. And the calf, I believe, would also bulge out a bit because it's basically. No, the calf would stay as it is, I believe. Let's see, hold on. Yeah, if you do not move your foot, the calf stays as it is. However, the calf is basically the muscle for the foot to point downwards. Because if you just sort of like roll back and you just like lift your foot up, put your hand on the sort of area where your calf is, and then just start pointing your foot downwards. You'll notice that it does flatten out more towards the bottom. However, the upper half of your calf will start to bulk up because that is the muscle that is pulling your foot downward so that you can basically have your toes down towards the floor. It's what gives the leg mobility. Oh, candy corn, here's the thing. I'm also fat. Just dig your fingers in there, I believe. And pretty much with the leg bulging like this is usually where you would see those three muscles. You're never going to see them sort of like, unless it's like a real thick person, you're never going to really see the specific bands like this. Most of the time on just sort of people that are athletic, this is pretty much how I shorthand it. because these muscles are almost always the two on either side are always going sort of in this direction, while the third in the middle is the one that usually gets to sort of bulge out here. And I will draw these same two visible muscles here for a better representation. Hell yeah! And now I'm going to try to sort of depict this with a muscle that is much bigger and more visible. Now we're gonna put this dude in a kind of pose where it could look like he's reaching up for something. And also, this is actually going to be a little bit of a crash course in the back. The back is also a fuck. The back is filled with muscles that all do something, because if you just because it's damning to think of the torso as just a sort of static structure, as just sort of a trunk. Trunk is not the word that I would really use to describe the torso, because if you just start moving your body around and just sort of feel everything that's going on inside, just start wiggle, because there is so much going on inside your torso. Because the only really solid structure that's inside that is the ribs that protect your organ and your spine. Everything else besides that is flexible muscle. The entire torso is just basically a big old fucking flour bag. And it can basically be squashed and stretched precisely like that. And the torso, I would think, is kind of, legs are quite difficult, but it's the torso that's really difficult to master. It's mostly just people tend to focus more on trying to master the muscles of the torso because that's what's most readily viewable. That's what's most recognizable. But it's really hard. With legs, most of the time they're not as difficult if you just sort of look at the muscular structure. The hips are a different story, but hips are technically attached to the torso, so my point still stands. Legs you can see, but it's just that most people do have a sort of layer of fat that hides the muscles in your legs, and that's just something inherent, because you really have to work to get your leg muscles toned in the way that you'll be able to see each individual thing. Runners, even most of the time, unless they are just in there, you can't really see the good definition sometimes. However, they are the best reference for leg muscles in motion. PETA, no, that's just because I like back muscles. Let's see. Hold on, I didn't see the question because you didn't at me. I'm just looking through now. Frank Frazetta is indeed really good to study for muscles. However, I would still say to look at real life, to just look at athletes in motion. Look at Olympians, because you would be hard pressed to not find photographs from the goddamn Olympics of athletes just doing their shit. And there are so many sports and activities in the Olympics, that can be applied to other stuff, sort of shot put, spear throwing, like jumping. Yeah, no, pro wrestling is actually quite helpful too, because the thing about pro wrestling is that a lot of them do have very athletic builds, and they have athletic builds that are basically meant to be sort of not agile, but they can move around, and they are also not essentially, oh, most of them are not over muscled, because if you're super buff, that's how you fucking end up getting yourself killed in the ring. Cause Dwayne the Rock Johnson is a good example of that. Of back when he was actually more known for being a pro wrestler. Like compare him then compared to how he is now. There is a stark difference. When he came back to pro wrestling with the build that he has sort of like similarly now, he pretty like I remember I think he did injure himself just because a man with that amount of bulk is not meant to move about that much. Now, this is going to be a smorgasbord. Yeah, cuz here's the thing. Pro wrestlers and strongman competitions are super different. They have very stark differences because pro wrestlers they are expected to still be strong because they have to pull off all the stunts and moves and everything. But they're also meant to move about the ring. They're meant to sort of get up onto the turnbuckles, unless you're like fucking Big Daddy B. They're still expected to have some ounce of agility to them. Whereas with strong men, they're meant more to sort of just lift. Lift and carry weights. They're not expected to sort of run, leap, jump like pro wrestlers are. And that's how you get a lot more sort of bulk onto strongmen. And this is also pretty much a good way to say that what Drac said. It gives you a lot more variety in body shapes, but it's also just really good to remember that, as I've said with the Olympics, look pay attention to what these people do every day of their lives. Cyclists are a real big one. Cyclists, runners will have leg muscles off the fucking charts. Strongmen will just be these giant mountain men of muscle with insanely thick trunks because that's where most of your lifting power comes from, along with your knees. uh, exactly, that's a really good reference. Swimmers will usually be sort of longer and svelte because then they can sort of cleave through more at the through the water. Yeah, exactly what Taylor has said. Look at people doing the sport, not posing for the camera. Bodybuilders, promos, and advertisements are all about looking as ripped as possible, and it's not what people who actually do things look like. The way that how do you do a breakdown of different types? I'm going to have to ask you to sort of elaborate on that. different muscle and body types in that regard. The way that you would break that down is pretty much different body types and different muscle types are useful for different things. It's kind of how I was saying before of cyclists and runners, they are going to be the ones that are better suited to have very thick, very strong legs. Um Fighters most of the time are going to be kind of more evenly balanced. However, even then it still sort of depends. Like take MMA for kind of an example. Kickers are going to have stronger, thicker legs. Um Hand-to-hand strikers are going to have sort of like thicker trunks and more like defined shoulders and arms because they're sort of like moving with their arms. Grapplers are going to be a bit more potentially lithe and more sort of flexible. It all depends on sort of looking from light. And it's also really still good to look at it because pretty much it's going to be a combination of looking at static imagery of just people existing, and also going to be a matter of seeing people actually doing the things they do that are activating those muscle groups. Because here's the thing, also, actually, just give me one moment because it is getting quite dark and I need to turn on the lights, but that'll probably only take me about 10 seconds. I'm back. The way that you break down the different types is pretty much just what does your character do? What parts of their body are they using more often? If you're dinosaur, I would say that would be sort of your torso and leg muscles because you're running shit down. Like it's all sort of just kind of thinking things in depth. Pretty much what Peter said, yeah. Now, this part of the body that I've kind of been drawing for about 20 fucking minutes now. Let's see. So, super agile martial artists would have a different build from a pro. Yes, absolutely. I mean, for example, fucking. Let's see. Take, like. Yeah, pretty much. I was just thinking of, like, which WWE wrestler would be a good, like, example, and my fucking brain was oscillating between Triple H and Roman Reigns for some reason. But yeah, no, take a look at Bruce Lee versus John, like, Cena. John is, like, a much thicker lad, like a much like stronger trunk and everything. Bruce Lee is a lot more sort of lithe, lithe, lithe. I think that's how you pronounce it. Whatever. A lot more scrawny, but it doesn't really matter. Wow, exact same image, exact same brain cell. Very nice. And meanwhile, compare that to John Cena. Like I said, thick boy, thick lad. It all depends. I need to save that. I will say thick as many goddamn times as I need to, which is gonna be several. But this muscle group that I'm showing right now, these right here, like pretty much when you like stretch your body, one half of them, because that part of the body is called the latimus dorsi. One half of the dorsi is basically scrunching up to just twist every like bit of your body over. Meanwhile, the other is relaxing so that that other part of your body can basically just stretch out as much. The human body is a system of pulleys, and your brain is the conductor, just yanking on as many fucking cords as it humanly can to get you from point A to point B. It's pretty much how John Mulaney said in one of his skits of just, what else is your body good for except taking your head from room to room? Not much else. That is what it's meant to do. Fool you are, Drac, for this has always been a lecture on thickness. Now, is there any other sort of thing that any of y'all are really curious about? Because also with the same idea of bodybuilding and sort of body types, for example, very sort of light thumb body types are going to be much more flexible than other types, mostly just because of muscle mass. Like, there's just there is a degree of muscle that you can have before it's just very difficult to bend and you just do not have the agility that you had before. It's for the same reason. Let's see. Pretty much as what Taylor said. Also, yeah, no, we can actually talk about abs. It is also true that six packs aren't always visible all the time. Six packs versus eight packs. Yup. Most of the time when you see like very visible six packs, it's mostly just from either flexing or just sort of lighting. It's a combination of both. Abs are an additional function for your torso to just sort of move about. It's also just sort of like to protect your guts, to sort of just like keep them in, hold them in. That like your abs retracting and sort of like bunching up is pretty much the main movement for the front of your body, along with the obliques. Abs is how you fetal position. Now let's see. The way that you draw abs to be sort of, because even here's the thing, abs are not going to be super cut defined even on very like thick people, at least not how you're going to draw them. And I'm just drawing this torso so that I can sort of get a feel for where I would put the packs. That is basically a combination of the obliques and the obliques and the muscles that attach to the scapula and ribs. Serratus anterior. Thank you, Taylor. I'll cover that once I cover the abdominals. Well, actually, no. I can probably cover that at the same time. Actually, yeah. I can kill two birds with one stone. Let's see. Yeah, no, Taylor. Learning the name. Here's, like I said, learning names. It's not necessary, but it helps. Because I have like an approximate knowledge of names and everything. I haven't really brushed up a whole lot on them. If you describe it to me, I'll know what they are and what they do, but I will not necessarily be able to sort of put names onto them. Now let's see. With the abs, they are basically just sort of thump, thump, thump. And I actually need to draw a bit more and go into the hips, sort of. Now, the thing with abs is they do not stop at the belly button. Your abs are actually, they go down a bit further than you would think. Your abs stop and basically cling to the forward end of your pubic bone. So they are more kind of like a shape like this. They do be clinging to the pubis though. Like a wasp stinger, yeah. And most of the time the belly button is sort of in let's put it in this area. Belly buttons aren't the same for everyone, but they are usually sort of right under sort of the line of the ribs in this area. Now, this is usually the structure for abdominals. A grid pattern right here. Now, the thing with 8-packs is that technically, so I might have made this a little bit too, there we go. You do technically have an 8-pack. It's just that unless you fucking stress it and you diet and you like just flex in a certain way, you will never really be able to see the 6-pack. Not the 6-packs, the 8-pack. Because the 8-pack is here. It is not normal to have an 8-pack that is just these same things. That's fucked up. That's incorrect. Get that out of my face. It's like this. But basically, let's see. The way to sort of draw the 6-pack more subtly, like here's the thing. The way to draw the 6-pack with while making it look natural. Let's see, hold on. Yeah, this is just like a stylized way that I do it. Yeah. Like even with the dude that Shen linked right now, you can kind of vaguely see the divot forming for an 8-pack, but it's still not quite there just cuz you have to really fucking train that area up. Now, let's see. Let's lower this down. And while we're on the topic of that, let's see. The obliques are basically muscles that attached to here. They are the part of the body that basically fill out this space right here. And it's basically just a big sort of strand, not strand, a big old sort of chunk of muscle here. Sometimes they'll sort of get a bit more defined, and sometimes I do like to just draw that in that way, like on characters, but you don't necessarily need to do it that way. But the obliques are basically kind of the way that you can twist around. Like abs are so you can bend forward. The obliques are so you can basically they're one of the muscles, they're parts of the muscles that help so your torso can turn around. Like cuz if you turn like right now a little bit and you just kind of like focus in on your abdominals, you can probably feel that sort of around that area, just like even subtly if you really try. You can probably feel the sort of bunch in the dorsi in your back, and also just sort of your oblique just sort of like scrunching up to twist your body. That's pretty much because sometimes the body is asymmetric. Sometimes it's not perfectly aligned. It really is a case by case. Yeah, human body is a fuck. Because there is actually a boxer out there, I can't remember his name exactly, who his abdominals are pretty much twisted like this. And it's not that anything's wrong with his physique. He's still a capable athlete and everything. That's just the way that his abdominals are formed, with just one side being sort of smaller and more bunched up than the other at a resting position. Yeah, pretty much like that. Here's the beautiful thing about the human body. We like symmetry, but ultimately we are asymmetrical creatures. We might look symmetrical, we have similar things on either side of our body, but really one half of our body might not necessarily align with the other half. Our hands might look the same at a first glance, but they're different ultimately. Our pretty much, yeah. You like your face is asymmetrical. One part of your body might droop more. One of your legs might even be subtly shorter. At our base, asymmetry is hard coded into our genetics, which is why people that tend to look prettier or all that sort of stuff are more symmetrical than average. Though I can assure you that they are still asymmetrical to a degree. If you take someone's photo front on and you flip one half of their face onto the other, I'm hit my mic. They are going to look significantly different because you are putting symmetry where symmetry where symmetry isn't present. Now with the obliques, isn't is yes. With the way that the serratus are, this basically just weaves onto the. Let's see, hold on. The serratus basically cling onto the ribs because, as I stated previously, they are meant to pull the scapula forward so that you can basically move your arms forward. And most of the time, that'll just mean that they weave in. Now, most of the time, they will not be so defined unless you're just flexing. Like, most of the time, the most defined part will be where they are weaving into the obliques. And they will be hidden up here by the dorsi. It's basically just a weaving pattern because they're clinging onto the ribs sometimes. Not necessarily clinging onto the ribs, but the rectus muscles have to get through the obliques to actually cling onto the ribs. So they're just going to sort of, yeah, what Taylor said, of just, they look like they zipper into each other, but it's not that they're zippering, they're just weaving into each other and they are going past one another. Because sometimes they might look even a bit more higher up like this, but that's not the case because with the serratus anterior, they are more kind of like tubings that are grabbing onto the ribs. But with the introduction of the obliques, they weave into one another and cut off that little like nub at the end. And you won't see it a wholly defined when unless this sort of a position is being done, because then that's basically stretching out the obliques, the stretching out the serratus, so you can kind of like see the lines at which they border. When the arm is down, the muscles are going to be at rest, so you're not going to necessarily really be able to see them. When the arms are forward, such as this, you're still probably not going to see a whole lot of them, even though they are flexing and doing a whole lot, mostly because the dorsi comes over to basically mask them. Though that does depend on a case by case basis. Gotta hide your nubs, dude. Now with let's see. With the abdominals. So the way that you make natural looking abs, and I'm just going to make different varieties, is it's all about more so the lack of definitive line. So here's someone who might not necessarily be, they're thin, but not exactly toned. I'm just lowering all the layers so it's a bit more visible. Like just sort of a thinness of line and all that sort of stuff. Now, for someone with a more cut and strong physique, the way that you do this, it's an exaggeration of it, but this does make it look sprayed on. And it kind of makes it look like you got rolls, like fucking like biscuits taped to your stomach. The way that you want to do it is at this point is less is more. So let's get rid of that. And it basically also like it's a game of how subtle do you want it to go. The deepest divots are usually going to be where the muscles connect to one another. So, using this sort of like grid that we have, this is kind of how I handle abdominals mostly. And this is like this is just how I do things. But most of the time, the biggest divots are still going to be how I drew the initial one, like here. These are where the initial divots are and where they mostly reside. And the biggest difference is that with these lines, they kind of dip in to try to meet the lines at there. By not connecting the lines inherently, your body still thinks that they are divvied up into defined segments. However, because there aren't many hard lines, it's a bit more it's more pleasing to the eye because the body isn't composed of hard lines. Sometimes you kind of it's a game as well too of just as along with here with the shoulder and everything. It would be in a diagram, it's of course going to be sort of like this, but sometimes being more subtle with the way that the muscle is and kind of just not connecting that line unless it's stylized or anything, and more just leaving that line for the imagination for either to fill in with shading or something like that, as well as the fact that the dorsi also just stays here and everything. Sometimes just leaving it like this is I'm just kind of focusing on each individual body part rather than a whole, so it might look a little bit fucky as a whole, but that's all right. Like it's all about sort of where to put the lines and just being more subtle with them. It is not rude to ask that, no. The way that you put the nipple on this pec is just because it's a little bit peculiar. So let's see. Having a bit of knowledge on where to put them, this is usually where it would be theoretically. So, and a good way to sort of, I would say, kind of like before you kind of get that intuitive knowledge of where to put it, is start here with the collarbone and then just sort of draw diagrams that kind of split the pec a little bit, and around here, like just to eyeball it, would be a good place to put it. And you can kind of apply the same thing to this. And that's kind of where you can put the nipple, or at least base it. And sometimes it might look weird, so you might need to adjust it. Yeah, no, nipples are super weird. Yeah, pretty much. Like that's also a reason of why you want to be more conservative with your lines too, where it's the deeper the line, the more defined and sort of deep the cleave is in your mind's eye. So abdominals that are drawn with a very sort of like thick defined lines are more sort of eerie because then it doesn't look like they're more cut. It looks like the abdominals are popping out more and creating more shadows, which can be a bit distressing. Yeah, as well as that. With this, because the shoulder is pulling the arm upwards, it's pulling the entire pec upwards because the connector area for this, for the pectoral muscle, it is attached to this area. So because this part of the body is going upwards, it is pulling the entire boob meat upwards like this. And this is actually where I will put a disclaimer and say that your the chest muscles are composed of the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor. Now, the pectoralis minor isn't necessarily because it's smaller or it does less work or anything, it's just because it's less visible. Your pectoralis minor, actually, most of the time, can be located right here underneath the major. And it is most of the time put behind into the scapula. On really sort of like ripped characters, because most of the time, unless it's like a very in-depth medical guide, most of the time it will consolidate the pectoralis minor into the major. But don't be fooled, it's there. But it just won't be visibly distinguishable from the major unless it's a very thick lad. Whereas the pectoralis major at rest will connect to the breastbone and the not the scapula, clavicle, and that's also kind of the reason why this is pulled up as well, because the clavicle is also being pulled up. So everything is just lifting the muscle upwards. So this is pretty much the pectoralis major at rest because it doesn't connect upwards to here. It actually connects midway here, and the minor sort of right here connects to the side behind the scapula here. Human body is a fuck. There's a lot of interconnecting motions. Now, is there anything else that you guys would want to have clarified? Dead ass, though. That is pretty much how it would be. The weird hunk of meat between the shoulder and neck. Oh, hold on. I think I know what you're talking about. So are you saying, so this is the shoulder. Are you talking about this section right here? That is, I know it's not, it's the trapezius. It's the trapezius muscle. That muscle is basically what takes up the entirety of your upper back almost. So let's see. That area right there is basically, so let's see, this is the skull, this is the spine, rudimentary. That basically attaches to the sort of base of your skull. And if I remember correctly, let's see. It basically there are the way that your scapula are kind of made or is also a bit weird because it's not a flat square. It's actually there's a bit of it that sort of flexes about, not flexes about, that turns around and actually creates a divot here for muscle to grab onto. It's like a little area for them to hook into. And then a circle right here so that the humerus can be latched into. Bicep can squish very compactly still. So the trapezius muscle is basically, it attaches to this area right here along the scapula, and it ends about here. Now this is also a rudimentary knowledge because there are other muscles that will cross over the trapezius. However, all of this is one big fat hunk of muscle that is meant to basically just turn your head, flex your back, move your arms. This muscle is big because it does so much. And most of the time when it's like quite big and bulky like that, because it's doing a whole lot, you will often see it peeking out over this area because it's still technically part of the neck, but because it's not fully sort of attached to over the shoulder, this is how it manifests. It is precisely why wrestlers often have big traps. Hmm. A good way to draw natural looking biceps and triceps. Let's see. It's the same principle with the abdominals. Let's see. Because here's the thing, if you look at it, your biceps are not all that big. Like you would think that the biceps take up about like this big chunk of like the arm and everything, and in some people that's the case, but most of the time it is more isolated to this area. And as for the triceps, they basically attach to a similar location. Let me see. Lord almighty. Triceps attach towards the back of this bone and also towards the back of the scapula. They have two little like prongs, one of which goes to the scapula and one of which goes to the bone. I need to make this a bit more distinct now. As well as the fact that your tricep kind of makes way for a more sort of sinewy area right here that it doesn't cover. This is not the tricep. This is something else entirely, because your triceps fold up and over this area to get to the arm. Ligament, yes, thank you. So the way that you would go about drawing one that looks natural with this in mind is pretty much all about that sense of subtlety. Because it would be very easy to just make it super defined and everything like that, and something that I admittedly do a whole lot because it's fun. But all you really need is subtlety. Because here's the thing, you don't need to connect the lines. And sometimes it'll work stylistically. Like if a style, like a really graphic style, involves like that sort of thing, this could work. But with more naturalistic looking sort of things like this, your mind will fill in the spaces for you. It's like, I cannot stress this more than I probably have been. It's all about subtlety. Knowing it is very good, but it is equally important to know where not to show it. Let's see. Arts and Goodies asks, I'm curious about what muscles are visible or drawn on average no muscular characters, and what actions they would do where the muscles would need to be defined. Like, how many of those muscle indications would you see on the average character? Well, for starters, let's take this arm that I've just drawn and apply that to a more naturally muscled character. One that maybe hasn't sort of, I don't know, trained to be an assassin or a fighter or something like that. The most that you'd see with a character sort of like that is you would see the shoulder maybe trying to define itself. You would see the sort of armpit giving way and forming itself into that little divot. Someone that isn't an interdimensional bloodsport champion, yeah. The most that you would see is just a subtle bump most of the time. As for the triceps, you probably wouldn't even really need to see a whole lot of it, except maybe and even then, like if they're not especially fit, like this little indicator right here could perhaps not even be there at all. It could just be like this. Because average regular Joe schmoes, they aren't going to be defined because they haven't been training at all. They're not going to be doing anything. Most normal people aren't really all that defined. Yeah, and it's like it's not even like unhealthy levels of fat or anything. It's just that most people just have a thin layer of fat that covers up the muscles. Like let's see. Even with the back, with how muscular and everything it can be, this sort of thing that I'm drawing right now, let's say it's just like an average dude. You would see the divot in the spine. And you would see where his shoulder blades kind of go. Maybe a little bit of the dorsi. But this amount is pretty much the level of definition that you could expect to see on a normal dude. And even then, I think I still define this a little bit too much. Just a little bit. Hmm. Like overall, someone who just isn't in like someone who isn't training, someone who isn't like an athlete or something, they're not going to be defined. They are not going to be cut. They're going to have sort of like softer features, and they're going to be more the sort of idea of not formless, but not as detailed. And if they are, like, those suggestions are going to be subtle. Like, I'm just gently detailing out where the cleave and the triceps would be for this sort of body. And even right now, I'm making a few mistakes because I'm not really focusing in on it. Like even with the shoulder being like bent up all that much, I've seen people like raise their hands and everything and all that sort of stuff. And this is about the amount of detail that you could expect to see on them. E- Even, however, if they are even skinny, the muscle and everything stretching up like that, like you wouldn't see it on this side, but you would if they're like skinny and not all that strong at all, or even not strong, but just like not thickly muscled and on the lankier side, you could potentially even actually see their ribs like this. And sometimes even with muscular characters, like strong characters that actually are muscular, if they are of a more lankier build, sometimes you're still going to see the back of their rib cages along their side in that area. And it's not that they're not strong, it's just that they're skinny and their muscles being pulled across along these ridges. I would say, in comparison to most other pro wrestlers, like in comparison, that's a pretty good example of a skinnier dude. Not like very particularly skinny, but like in regards to a person that like does heavy lifting, does athleticism, like is agile and everything. Like in the pro wrestling scene, that's a skinnier guy, I would say. Yeah. And I can guarantee that if that sort of dude were to like lift up his arms or at least sort of stretch out like his body to a side, you could probably see like the little dents of his ribs back around where his dorsi are. And even like it I've also been talking about like skinnier lads and everything where it's sometimes also people just can't really build muscle. Like they can get it, but it wouldn't be particularly I wouldn't want to say noticeable, but like a visual factor in strength. Like a character with this sort of build, I would say would be pretty thin but still quite strong, relatively speaking. That's a skinny lad. Yeah, what Taylor also says too. Definition does not equal strength. Pretty much, yeah. Like y'all are getting it. Y'all I want to say that this is something that people kind of already intuitively know, but it's not something that they kind of understand nor realize until you actually start to look for it. It's all about just examining and looking around. Is there any last thing that could be clarified with anybody? Because I think at this point, I think, in about 2 hours, I think we've covered a pretty wide margin of things that I hope is going to be able to stick. Because I know, I probably blasted through it at light speed, but I do sincerely hope that it's helped. I can close up with butt muscles. Because here's the thing, butt muscles are weird. Butt muscles are fucking bizarre. Because the round shape that you see most of the time, that's not muscle, that's more fat. So let's see, we got the tailbone here, which fucking looks like an alien arrowhead in my opinion. We got it from behind. Get the leg bones in there. Let's Now, like I said, every muscle on the body is a fuck, and the ass is not exempt from that because right here, this area is the anchor point for these muscles, and they will basically go about and attach right here to the femur and basically just cause a sort of curtainish shape. A butt this broken down does not nearly look as nice. Like, this is doing nothing for me. As well as the fact that there's an additional factor of the gluteus, in that there is the gluteus minimus, which kind of is more or less concentrated inside here. But there's also strands of muscles that come out from here that also attach. Let's see. Yeah, that is a butt gone wrong or gone horribly right. It's really up for you to decide. But yeah, it's like unless you are like I'm want to kind of close out with a note that unless you are going to go into medical illustration, you don't need to know exactly, like with pinpoint precision, how a human body looks. Like, I know the fundamentals, know what it naturally looks like, but don't get too lost in the sauce. Don't get carried up in the small details. And as for your questions, I am doing pretty all right. I have been trying to kind of get some projects in mind, but with stuff outside in the world going on, it's been a little bit of a damper to the mood. But I've been doing all right. I've been in a good mind space recently. Kind of went through a art drought not too long ago, but I've been recovering from that. Right now, I've mostly just been doing commissions. I haven't really been able to get my foot into the art industry just yet. I'm still kind of looking for opportunities, but I mean, with the craziness of everything, I don't think I'm going to be able to really snag a gig just yet. But however, I do have hopes. I'm still looking. I'm still out there. As for social media, I mean, I have a Twitter. I have an Instagram. Instagram, I don't really update all that much just because it's a pain in the ass to upload shit to Instagram. But I update my Twitter a lot more. Both of those are just the same handle that I use for pretty much everywhere. Magistelle. I have a Tumblr that's Magi Art. I don't really update it all that whole lot. What I use for my drawings, um, I use a Wacom Intuos 4 tablet that I've had for roughly about 5 years now. I think going on 6. I use Clip Studio for my program. It's super reliable. I've been using it around the same time that I've been using this tablet. Oh yeah, no, I also did win a OCT run by Abaddon. I used a forearm punch boy, much to no one's surprise, really. I can link the string of comics that or the Imgur album that someone made of all of my rounds. As for plans to return and fight, God, I would like to, but I've just got a lot of stuff going on. I would love to come back and just do a comic or two, but at this point, I mostly just want to try to focus more on my own things, kind of. As for Gumshoe, I will admit, however, that I'm kind of at a loss on where to take him right now. Like I've been at a loss for a long time ever since the Meryl battle, just because I've kind of thought to myself, I don't know where else to take this character. I kind of hit the peak in Lightspeed Death Tournament. I can't. He's good. He works more as sort of like a background entity. I feel. I will, however, say, and I'm putting this down on as a gauntlet. If someone, anyone, fucking submits a boxing character, I'm here. I will come back for that, and that alone. Because goddamn it, I want to draw a fucking boxing match so goddamn bad. A fucking. Well, fuck it. Bring out your boxes, I'll fight all of them. But. Aside from that. Yeah, I think we good. Peter, the answer is yes. But yeah, also, Arts and Goodies, would you want me to save these assets that I made? Because I was probably just going to throw
Yeah.
them into the ether.
Yeah, you can just save them, then post them in the Void lecture notes to be pinned. And if you also had any other notes you wanted to post as well in the Void lecture notes, feel free to do that so that stuff